I met Fawzia in Brussels 2 years ago. I'm not one for going to Brussels. I tend to avoid those kinds of venues. But it was a genuine delight of my career to meet Fawzia. They tell you not to meet your heroes, but I'm so glad I met one of mine. I could spend an hour telling you about all that she's achieved, but I will try to be as brief as possible so that you hear from her more. Fawzia is a leading Afghan parliamentarian and indeed was the first woman elected to be the deputy speaker in the Afghan parliament. She currently serves as the chairperson of Afghanistan's Women's Civil Society and Human Rights Commission, as well as president of the Women for Afghanistan initiative. She was a crucial part of the Taliban peace negotiations prior to their return in 2021, for which she was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. She's also written one of my favorite memoirs, The Favorite Daughter, which I encourage you all to read, and I believe there's a new book coming out, though you have to be a French speaker to get an early read of that. But I will not take any more time, and I welcome the wonderful, charming, and wickedly funny Fawzia Koofi to the podium.
I only hope that my voice will accompany me today, because I'm not feeling well, definitely. But I didn't want to miss this opportunity. As Elham said, I want to thank you, Elham, and everyone who was involved in providing this opportunity and space for me. But when I first got an email from Elham, that I met her 2 years ago, but we were not in regular contact. When I got an email from her, and the title was like Justice Lecture at SOAS University, I was a bit nervous because obviously anything that has got to do with lecture, university, even if you are somebody who has spoken before the Human Rights Council in Geneva or Security Council in the UN, or even the UN General Assembly, or even in a parliament where there were men with turban, shalwar kameez, ties, women with different outfit, or even if you were somebody who negotiated with the Taliban, but when you hear the term lecture, and even that in a prestigious university like SOAS, you get nervous. So I was like, what is going to happen? I opened the email, and I noticed that it's about a topic that is very close to our heart. But the term lecture, the term exam, university, they say, when nothing to compare my nervousness or even my character and my political belief with this gentleman that I'm going to name, but they say when Mussolini was waken up early in the morning in 1939, to be informed about the fact that Germany had invaded Poland to start, it was the beginning of the World War II. Reportedly, he said, "You wake me up as if I had an exam." Now, you can imagine how much nervous I was, because by no means I can compare myself to Mussolini. But when I opened the email, and I was informed that the topic was reclaiming women's rights in the face of gender apartheid, I felt a sense of ease. The issue is not only close to my heart, but it's also one of those defining struggles of our time. In today's world, every human being is either threatened or affected, as Elham said, by suppressive regimes that systematically target powerless, those who do not wield weapons, but instead fight with their voices. My part of the world, Asia and the Middle East, I'm always confused in whether I call myself an Asian or Middle Eastern. But I'm in between, like many other confusion that I have in introducing my identity, because often people tell me that, are you a feminist? Then why do you wear your scarf? So I, coming from Asia and Middle East, once was the cradle for civilization, including of religious civilization. during the 14th and 15th centuries, cities like Samarkand and Bukhara were the centers of Islamic scholarship, culture, and Sufi thought of Sufi jurisprudence of Islam under the Timurid dynasty. These cities were not only home to renowned scholars, poets, who shaped the intellectual and spiritual tradition of the region and our religion. However, the same region has now become a center for Islamic radicalization, where women's rights are often targeted as a tool of suppression. The shift was particularly evident during the Cold War, when both the East and the West, money was poured into the jihadi groups to serve their geopolitical agenda. Then, during the Cold War, when I was a child, when these millions of dollars from the global north was sent to our region, our countries were before that enjoying a civilized life, where women's rights was not a means of political struggle or a means of political pressure. But during the jihad time, during the Cold War, this is beginning of 1977, 78, that many millions of dollars of the global north, your taxpayers, most of your taxpayers, were sent to jihadi groups to defeat the USSR then, without any benchmarks on women rights or human rights. In fact, some of these money was spent to empower radicalization, including our education system, our curriculums. The structure was moving towards radicalization. As a child, when I was growing in a society where we were not segregated on the basis of gender, all of a sudden you see people graduated from madrasas in Pakistan or Iran or the regional countries where once was the cradle for civilization. They came all of a sudden with turban and with a new self-defined ideology of Islam, which is basically a Deobandi definition of Islam. They were trained in madrasas by the money from the global north, from the Western countries. Even our curricula in the schools were radicalized to the extent that it was actually promoting violence, promoting discrimination. Some of the madrasas that belonged to some of the jihadi leaders who actually then were leading jihadi parties in Afghanistan, they had their own madrasa. Every jihadi leader had their own madrasa or school. Madrasa is a religious school for those who are new to this term. They had madrasas and universities that were set up in Pakistan and Iran. And these madrasas curricula was developed by the very prestigious universities like Nebraska University. And in those, if you read those curriculas, the books, it's all about violence. It's all about discrimination. One of the examples I can give you, because later on then we were part of the curricula development and improvement in Afghanistan when I was opening those books. So one of the books is like, and these were funded, not only funded, but actually developed and printed in Nebraska University. So one of the examples is that my father is a mujahid. Jim, jihad, my father is a mujahid. Jihad is a holy war. And then there is a gun. On top of the gun is a flower. Or, for instance, another example was like two parties fight with each other. One party kills 10 people, the other party kills 30 people. Out of 100 people, how many are alive and how many are killed? This is a mathematic example. And these curricula are all printed in, the capitals, with, at least in this curricula that I'm referring, $50 million was invested. So there was no benchmarks on how the situation of women and human rights is. Some of this money was spent also through the intelligence and security organizations to promote military radicalization and extremism. Then we witnessed the growth of Taliban, which you often hear these days through media. There were other networks, including Tariq Taliban Pakistan. It's a military extremist movement that operate now in border areas between Afghanistan and Pakistan. If you look at the Central Asia, the same countries where I mentioned few names, Samarkand, Bukhara, now you have Islamic movements like Turkestan Islamic Party. Previously, it was called East Turkestan Movement, ETIM, Jundullah, for instance, Jaish-e-Mohammed, and others. These Islamic military extremist groups actually create conflict, and conflict leads to injustice, to suppression of women especially. This is not only limited to Afghanistan. Ilham just gave example of Iraq and Libya. For instance, in Libya, just a few months ago, they introduced the law on vice and virtue. Women's personal freedoms are restricted with conservative social norms, dictating dress code, movements, employment opportunities, even recently introducing a chaperone, like a male companion when you travel. In Yemen, for instance, women are completely excluded from political participation. In Syria, well, there is a lot of optimism. We need to see, I hope, the ruling party will move towards the right direction. Of course, nothing to compare to Afghanistan, but it's a new dynamic in the region. In Afghanistan, it's even worse. In Afghanistan, it's beyond imagination, but it's real. What's happening in 21st century to the woman and to every citizen in Afghanistan is real. It's a real and complete erasure of women under the name of our beautiful religion. And for those of you who probably don't need to have that information about Islam, but when you hear that in some of these Muslim countries, women are being erased from public life or completely segregated from the education institutions under the name of Islam, on the contrary, they do it against the principles of Islam. These are some of these, they do it with the money that has gone to them for the regional and global geopolitical interest. So in Islam, actually, the first verse that came to our Prophet was Iqra, means read. But the Taliban denied women from their access to education under the name of the same religion and in front of the world's eyes. Over the past 3 years, the Taliban have systematically dismantled women from every aspect of their participation. Their participation in public life, the women's education, not only beyond secondary years, but from university education, basically cutting off women from any opportunity that make them feel human beings. Women are prohibited from working in the government, including in the NGOs. Recently, they have issued a law which even bans women from speaking in the public. So sometimes when I hear about terms like, apartheid or gender persecution, the internationally recognized terminology, we often have this debate and discussion that is it really even apartheid? Because in our case, it's more than apartheid. If women are completely erased for their gender from any kind of public life, it is no longer apartheid. It's complete erasure and denial of women. On the other hand, when the Taliban were empowered to come back to power, we were told that the Taliban have changed, that there are now Taliban 2.0, that they have they have become more softer. And this was not only a narrative promoted by the Taliban, but this was a narrative promoted by some Western diplomats, including some American diplomats who were in Afghanistan. Remember when the international community came to Afghanistan on an act of self-defense after the 11th September attack, based on Security Council resolution, they said, we are there to support people of Afghanistan, fulfill their democratic rights. We're there to free all Afghan women. But on the contrary, when they decided to talk with the Taliban, and obviously we were carrying the main burden of the torch of the freedom for the last 20 years, but throughout our history. But when they started negotiating with the Taliban, they did not include women, civil society, even the Afghan government, which the Afghan people and the international community invested blood and treasure to make that government. They have not included that. And we were told you should believe that Taliban 2.0, they are changed, they're a new Taliban, second generation, they will allow women, including the Taliban themselves, which on the record they said that the woman can go to school, university, get PhD, become prime minister. And even ministers work in the business. We were so naive to be trapped into that narrative that was created for us by the global north. The narrative that was created that we must believe them. Now look what's happening in the United States. It's something that we should think about whether we should believe anyone who create that narrative of, the imported narrative for us. They said either you should believe the Taliban 2.0 or you are pro-war. But women's rights in Afghanistan is not the only crisis. There are suppression of the population from all ethnic groups. People are fleeing to leave their houses. It's a total chaos that's happening in Afghanistan. More than 8 million people left Afghanistan. Sooner or later, there will be a refugee crisis in the borders in Europe. But what has the world done? The world obviously is we're living in a time which there are so many competing global conflict agendas, from what's happening in Ukraine, what's happening in Palestine, what's happening in Sudan, in Libya, Yemen. Afghanistan is no longer attracting any attention. Many people see Afghanistan issue or the women and human rights issue as a phenomenon which is so marginalized, limited to the borders of Afghanistan. It's not going to impact any of us in the global community. We often fail to understand the link between women's rights and security. We often fail to understand if it was not for the money that went to our region during the Cold War to protect the security of different capitals, the growth of extreme radicalized views were not to the extent that we are experiencing now in our region. So only until the capitals, in powerful capitals, security is a direct threat, they are not going to take any action. But also we have come internally to this realization that if you really want to shape your destiny of your nation, you have to have your own narrative. Because for 20 years, the laws were translated for us, from French or English to Farsi and Pashto. It's time for us, for people from the developing world, to start thinking and owning our own narrative, be it a narrative related to gender justice, a narrative related to our security, which are interrelated, or to anything that matters for us, for our future. We need to take our destiny. And that's why, since the collapse, Afghan women were holding the torch for a change, for a narrative that they want to bring the change, bring about the change. And as much as you hear about, different countries in the freedom-fighting and freedom-loving nation promoting this gender equity term, but for Afghan women, it has been a struggle to make our voice heard. It has been a struggle to open the doors for us. And often I actually start questioning the genuinity and the sincerity of different world leaders about their claim of protecting human rights or women's rights. And honestly speaking, most of the time I also start questioning the global order that are there to protect the voiceless. The UN Charter, the ICC, International Criminal Court, the International Court of Justice, the UN Human Rights Council, all of these institutions, at some point, we start even questioning their existence. Because I believe the women movement in different parts of the world, and the civil society movement, and the liberation movements, they carried the main burden, and with bare hand. So you can imagine the resources that go to these institutions, the resources that go to UN, the resources that goes to ICC or Human Rights Council. If these resources were available to these women institutions or civil society institutions or women rights movements, how much of a difference they would have made. Because we are basically doing everything barehanded, because we believe in it. It's our passion. It's a life experience for us. We want to see the change that we believe in real time. It has not been easy for the women movement globally. But despite all of that, despite the fact that there has been a declining trust over the international institutions, such as the UN, such as the ICC and ICJ, recently, on an act, ICC suggested the arrest warrant against the 2 Taliban leaders. Now, I can't remember recently any political leader was arrested based on ICC's decision, except 1 or 2, but it created a small hope in the end of this dark tunnel for the women movement in Afghanistan, I think globally, because I see our fight for justice as a global fight. As much as the world leaders try to make it marginalized to our borders, but it is a global fight. Because what happened in Afghanistan in 2001 when we were shouting that we are a victim of global radicalization, nobody listened to us. And then the 11th September attack happened. When the 11th September attack happened, that was the time the world realized that we need to do something about it. And now they are watching and waiting to see another 11th September attack happen before they wake up, because it's not their problem. And we are living in a world where we believe that, we are living in our own bubbles. For as long as I have a computer, for as long as I have a job, no matter what's happening in the rest of the world, we often forget that it's because of the sacrifices, the struggles of the generation before us for freedom that we enjoy what we enjoy today. We take it so much for granted. My friends, all of you, we take it so much for granted. Even I took it for granted 3 years ago. I thought, we are not going to go back to zero location. We are not going to back to scratch. It's not possible that in 21st century, women are deprived from their basic rights to education, to mobility, to work, to get out of their homes, to be heard. Not only by men, but to be heard by another woman. It's regarded as intimacy. Can you believe it? Like if you're walking in the street and you want to speak to a taxi driver, the taxi driver will tell you, my sister, don't speak, because then they will stop me, the vice and virtue. And these people who call themselves vice and virtue, they're also often not even educated, let alone Islamic education. They're not educated, simply they cannot read and write. They control our thinking, our way of thinking, our freedom of expression, our freedom of ideas. And if you look at the root causes of this, as Ilham was saying, if you look at the root causes of all of this, where have they started to grow? The link goes to the lack of accountability towards international justice. The fact that there is a culture of impunity, and it goes like a vicious circle. And those who actually commit not only direct human rights violation, but pay for it, sponsor it, and radicalization sponsorship is not only by groups, it can be state-sponsored radicalized groups, which in our case, we have seen this. When you look at the root goes somewhere, and they control our thought because they are afraid of educated women. Because they know that an educated woman will never allow her daughter to pick up, or her son, in this case, to pick up a gun and to fight, but rather use the voice, the pen, which in many occasions is much more powerful than the weapon. So they know where to target. They target the right part, which is the education, the foundation for justice. And globally, there is no accountability. The states, in many occasions, forget their accountability, forget their responsibility. And that's why the responsibility comes to citizens, to civil society, to women movements. When the 15th August collapse happened, most of you probably remember when there was the photos from the airport of people trying to run out of the airport, try to leave Afghanistan. We all remember those tragic stories and photos from Afghanistan. It was a time for global action. But most of the states even failed to answer phone calls of their partners. It was for organizations and individuals who then stepped up and acted on behalf of the states. So that's why it's time for that transformative justice for individuals to step in and act. And often we actually question our ability. What can I do? What can I do to change the situation? I think all of us have a role to play towards that international accountability. Because we often think our actions are very small and it will not change anything. And if you are working for justice, if you are working to empower justice, and if you are working for a cause of human rights, which is often very lonely fight, you often feel yourself very lonely, including your family members. There will be a lot of people who will actually turn against you. In my lifetime, I have my whole family members who at certain point of my life and history, they became against me. Initially, my own brothers went against me. When I, for the first time, protested on the streets of Afghanistan as an MP, defending the law on violence against women, because before that, any kind of violence in Afghanistan was justifiable for women. So we needed to legalize some of these violence and have a punishment for it, including early and forced marriage or physical abuse of a woman. When this was not approved in the parliament, we went to the streets to protest. The first call I received was from my brother who lives in Europe, and he was like, "You come from a very dignified family. You shouldn't go to the streets because you're a representative of our family." So the definition of dignified person is not somebody who is loud. The definition of dignified person in the stereotype definition of our parts of the world is somebody who is silent, who is acceptance of whatever happened to them. And my answer was, he sometimes remembers that, and things have changed. Obviously, they need to change, and they have changed as well. They have adopted to the new reality. We all need to adopt to new realities, and he did. And sometimes when we have the dinner or breakfast together in his house, he's like, you challenge me by saying that I am representative of women first and then representative of the family. So all of us who have fought for justice, we had to go through certain difficult times in our life, but struggle doesn't come with a cost. It always comes with cost when it's for freedom. When we were fighting over the last 3 years for simple things like codified gender apartheid, because people need to believe in these international mechanisms. Like there is actual gender persecution happening in Afghanistan, which some of the UN reports says it amounts to crimes against humanity. You stop it there before it goes to Libya, or before even it goes to United States. You stop it there. We were often, even neglected, ignored. It wasn't easy. We had to knock every doors of those, capitals who are even holding feminist foreign policy to convince them to stand with us. And it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy. I think some of the moments, I have a lot of women rights activists, at least few in the first rows from Afghanistan. There were moments that we completely kind of lost hope, and we said it's not going to happen. We might go back to Afghanistan and agree with the current status quo. But at the end of the day, it happened. Like requesting arrest warrant for 2 Taliban leaders, which happened last week, is not a big thing. Probably you don't even know about it. You are not aware of it. But for us, it was a big news. It was historic because it was all these women with bare-handed, with bare feet, in the streets of London, in the streets of Kabul, in the streets of Kandahar, in the streets of Bamyan, Badakhshan, in the streets of all these different capitals, who fought for justice. And I think we can all make that small contribution, which has a big impact. I often say that working for justice is like you climb a mountain, and a very big mountain, and all of a sudden you're in search of water and you see that there is no water. You have to climb again. But you will eventually find that water. It's not like a bucket of money that is fulfilling. But the sense of fulfillment from the fact that you are part of a movement that brings international accountability to perpetrators of genocide, to perpetrators of human rights violation, that's the best feeling. It's probably the most rewarding cause, and probably even better than the bucket of money. So whatever contributions you can, you need to do that. Because we need to redefine the international accountability mechanisms. We need to rediscover them. Because even when we campaign for this gender apartheid, we go to the UN. The UN doesn't know what are the principles of gender apartheid. How should they actually put it and codify it? It's the citizens that can make that change. So no matter if you're a student, or if you're a head of an NGO, or if you're a charity, or if you're a business person, if you're a philanthropist or entrepreneur, or just a social media activist, you can make it a difference in your own way. Because when there is a just society, everything else will follow in order. And that's why we're fighting for justice. Because I don't believe injustice limited to Afghanistan will remain to the Afghanistan borders. I think injustice in Afghanistan means injustice anywhere. As Martin Luther King says, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So therefore, my plea to all of you is, all of you has a role to play in your own capacity to make sure that the world is a better place. Because otherwise, sooner or later, we will be a victim of wrong politics of our global leaders, as we were. We were so naive to believe them that they were right, that they were here to protect us in Afghanistan, protect our rights, and all of a sudden, even I remember one American diplomat, when I was arguing with him about the fact that in the Doha agreement that is signed between the Taliban and the United States, there is no mention of human rights once. No mention of women's rights. It's the most dehumanized agreement between the Taliban and the United States. When I challenged one of the American diplomats, he was like, but these are your domestic issues, Ms. Koofi. When you come to your own intra-Afghan negotiation with the Taliban, you can resolve them. And I'm like, yes, thank you so much, but you came to Afghanistan. You came to Afghanistan. We lost 120,000 of our soldiers in the battlefield, believing that you are here because we are together working for democracy. And all of a sudden, this democracy and democracy values become my problem? So I think you should dare to challenge the status quo, if the status quo even can reach to superpowers, because we make them superpowers. It's us who make them superpowers. Anybody who wants to stand in justice in the face of apartheid that's happening globally, we must unite. Because these suppressive regimes can unite very easily. I thank you.
Hello? I didn't lie. I mean, this is all superfluous. This is really about just the two of us right now. Thank you so much. There's so much to think about and so much to unpack. I won't hog the entire session, but there's a couple of things that you mentioned that specifically rang true to me. And I want to come back to this global, really the global impact of what's happening. And I guess my first thought is, maybe I'll start with a reflection. You worked on the violence against women law draft in Afghanistan, and I did the same in Libya. And I remember a very clear moment when we were in the negotiations for the law, and it was, you know, it was a UN-sponsored initiative where they had 12 women experts drafting of various political leanings. And we battled for 6 months to get one provision into it, which is to offer or to allow for abortion in the case of rape. And that was a battle that took a lot to win, and it felt like a real sense of satisfaction. And we went away for a few months to kind of gather thoughts, and then we came back to have a follow-up session on the next part of the drafting. In that period, we saw the Supreme Court in the United States overturn Roe v. Wade. And the next meeting, the representative from the Islamist group in the room, the Muslim the Libyan version of the Muslim Brotherhood, came in and said, "See, I told you this wasn't settled practice." And we went back to square one, to the negotiations and about whether abortion could be included. Was it settled law or not? And I think it's really important, and I find it useful to give that example because it just shows really how interlinked these arguments are on both sides. It's the point you said, you know, those who seek to oppress, do unite, do find the precedent, do find the examples, and we aren't always as good as they are at that. And I guess that gets me thinking when we're looking at the situation, you know, of women, of regression in women's rights. It is a global phenomenon. And it is a phenomenon that is born out of us forgetting the examples or the experiences of Afghanistan and others in Iran. So looking at it from the Libyan perspective, where we are at the beginning of our journey to this, and I guess my question is, in Afghanistan, it was sort of branded as ideological. This was a religious movement. In Libya, those who are pushing for this aren't religious, aren't using that ideology. They're banking on a conservative culture and emoting a conservative culture, a protectionist mentality. And so I guess, where is it that there's room to halt this movement or to counter this movement, or indeed to reclaim the narrative, as you mentioned, about, wait, we need to write our own narrative. This isn't what protection looks like. This isn't what safety for women looks like. So, you know, maybe we can benefit from that to understand maybe how we can address the trajectory of the Libyan journey a little bit.
Well, that is, I think, the sad part of the story, because most of these suppressive regimes that weaponize religion actually often lack religious knowledge. And I just gave example of the Taliban. So how the Taliban came to power in 1996 in Afghanistan, when I was a medical college student. They came to Afghanistan, and Talib is like a word of a student of madrasa, like a religious school. When they first, were very fast in overtaking the provinces in Afghanistan. They were mainly going with one hand holding Quran and one hand holding the gun, two different districts, and they were claiming that they're agents of peace, they're changing the society. And people believed them. But when they came to Kabul, they used the religion. When they came to Kabul, which is the capital, when they took complete control of like at least 80% or 90% of Afghanistan, they started imposing some of the self-defined ideology, which has no roots in our religion. For instance, the first thing they target even then was women's education. And I think they do that because, as I said before, they do that in many societies when the education level is low. People tend to believe what the narrative is. And when I said we need to write our own narrative, including the religious narrative, because how many literally books are actually written by women? How many books, religious books, are interpreted and translated by women? From day one, we are taught that it's a gun. I mean, with due respect to all the gentlemen who are here, it's a gun that belonged to a man. So a man, that supremacy and the power always belonged to men, right? So I think we need to increase our religious education. This is the key, because that's how you can challenge them. And I remember from the time that I was like tabling the law on violence against women, and including putting some regulations on multi-marriage, because according to our religion, a man can marry up to 4 wives. It doesn't stress on exactly marrying 4 wives. It says you can marry up to 4 wives, because then people used to marry more than 4 wives, up to 9, 12 wives. And they were like, you can marry up to 4 wives if you have the conditions, right? So a lot of men in our society misuse that condition and misinterpret it. So we try to regularize in the parliament that if your wife is not sick, if your wife is not agreeing to your second marriage, then you will be put in prison if you marry second times. So these men went to, use this against me nationally and say, you know what, Ms. Koofi banned, un-Islamically banned multi-marriage or marrying 4 wives. And if I didn't have, I'm not claiming that I'm a scholar, but at least I had the basic knowledge to counter that narrative and have our own narrative. So we need to create our own narrative, not only from a national political point of view, but also from our own identity. What identity? Because they actually relate. Now, 2 days ago, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Iran was in Afghanistan. And I was like, what is it that connects them while, there are 2 different Islamic jurisprudence as well, because Iran is like mainly Shia jurisprudence, and Taliban are mainly Hanafi. It's a jurisprudence that I belong to as well. But what is it that connects them except politics? But we have so much in common, but we cannot connect. So I think we need to follow the same path as they do. Play the same game. Because often as women also, we don't learn to play the same game, because we don't dare to enter the red lights. So when I involved in the negotiation, for instance, along with my 3 other sisters, a lot of even women rights activists would tell me, and you were in the negotiation, Ilham, I'm sure you have a lot of stories. These women were telling me that, why are you doing the negotiation? A lot of us don't
stay dignified. It's the dignified point.
Exactly. Yeah. So they're like, why are you negotiating with the Taliban? This is not something that, men definitely told me that this is not something that women should do, but even women. So I think we should dare to take that bold step first, even it means entering the red zone, which we have so many red zones as women. So many no entry zones. We are told there are boundaries that you have to respect.
No, absolutely. And I think it's, I'm sure we both have lots of stories about where we belong. We always joke about how quickly we'll get a comment on any report we put telling us to go back to the kitchen. Another point you made, which is obviously very, very topical, important to look at in this moment, is really the role of multilateralism and the world order, quote unquote. And you made a very eloquent case for the misuse almost of the funding to be going there instead of to more grassroots work or initiatives. But also I think there is, this question that needs to be looked at, right? And I think it's this question that these tools that were created, or this, it feels like SOAS is the perfect venue to be discussing dismantling the world order. But I think there is something to be looked at here in the question of what has been proven in the last 2 years, more loudly than ever, is that it doesn't work. You mentioned the arrest warrants for the Taliban leaders. In fact, we had an arrest warrant for a Libyan official last week, and he was arrested in Italy. Wait, don't get too excited. It took less than 12 hours for the Italian authorities to release him back to Libya and put him on a flight back to Libya. And I think there is a moment there to reflect on, you have an arrest warrant being issued. a police force activating it, and immediately the political element comes in and undoes that. And so what hope do we have if even when it works the way it's meant to work, you find a technicality to release someone and immediately put him on a private jet back to Tripoli? And so I think there is something to be looked at, even us as a movement, as a human rights movement, where we put our resources in this. And you talked about the importance of international accountability. How do we achieve that when the tools that we've all been conditioned and taught are the tools to use have proven time and time again that they just are not fit for purpose?
Well, I think, yes, it's a very, very important question, but yet a very difficult road ahead of us. Because as I said, we are the live experience of how tough it is to even convince the organizations that are supposed to protect these international accountability mechanisms. But nonetheless, I think with all of the, I was just talking to a friend of mine who is among the audience, and he was like, who should police the police, right? I think that sense of awareness among the citizens is very important. I just gave an example of the UN, how much money goes to the UN. So for any UN staff that works in Afghanistan, I have huge respect to them because I used to be ex-UN staff. I know how difficult in different circumstances they work, huge respect. However, if a UN staff works in Afghanistan, he or she gets like at least $12,000 as a salary, plus a non-family duty station allowances and this and that. And every 2 months, a rest and recreation business class ticket to leave Afghanistan because they are living in a conflict zone. But a women rights activist who is protesting on the streets, because Afghan women have become that aware about their rights, unlike the Taliban first time that they were in power in 1996, and we thought this is a usual status quo. Nobody challenged their definition. Now, internally at least, or at least women groups. But now they're challenged by women protesters. They write against them, internationally, nationally. They do that when they do not have enough money to even top up their phones. And they're the main agents of change because it's because of their activism that the arrest warrant was issued. Obviously, there was politics behind it, but also their activism, their testimony. So I think there is more awareness. We need to be an aware and alerted citizen. That is the key and the first step. Second, resources should be allocated. I think we need to hold our politicians in your own capitals accountable for how much money every year is actually spent on these issues like, justice or civil society empowerment or women movement or even education. Because I think 6% of all the budget, 6% is a lot of money of the total budget of a year, of a country, goes to military. But how many percent of that money goes to a civilized movement? How much political commitment goes to that? So I think being aware as a citizen is important, using your voice, allocating resources, doing research and creating narrative and papers is very, very important because there are new terminologies. When we first used this term, gender apartheid, even countries like South Africa, where are the torch holder for apartheid, they were like Russian apartheid. They were a bit hesitant by using the gender apartheid. But now we have some progress. Hopefully, it's gone to negotiation. The amendments to the room status has gone for negotiation. So it's a good step. Even if the political ecosystem in Afghanistan changes, this is what we are trying to do. Because I believe women's rights will only change if there is a change in the political ecosystem. Those who believe that we need to influence these supremacy, patriarchy ideas to change their mentality, I think it doesn't work, at least in our context. So we need to change the political ecosystem in order to change the situation of women. And we are working towards that change of political ecosystem, including with Taliban. We would like to establish a government that Taliban are a small part of it, because they're a small reality. And the rest of the society in our country also become parts of it. But if it doesn't change, then we need to leverage all of these mechanisms, including apartheid. So the gender apartheid is gone for negotiation. It's a huge change. I think, as much as I said we are disappointed because of the slow move, multilateralism is falling apart. I think it's more so because now US is out of WHO, right? And I think, they were never part of ICC. So as much as the multilateralism is facing challenge, I think it is a mechanism we need to hold it. Even if it's like working very poorly, we need to hold it. But in the meantime, we need to strengthen the civil society, the women movements, the media, to hold them accountable for how the resources are allocated, how political commitment is there, how they're honest to what they say. Because having a tweet, usually I see some of these leaders put a tweet on my sympathy to Afghan women. And when I ask them to even host one of our summits or meetings, they don't issue visa for Afghan women. So beautiful words will not actually heal anything. We need to hold them accountable for actions.